Good morning, everyone. You guys can keep eating, and I'll just talk while you're eating. It's so good to see all of you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Stefan Johnson from WDRB News. I want to welcome you to the Morton Center's annual luncheon. Today, we honor the individuals and families who are in long-term recovery. Your presence here today shows that you know that there's a great need for what the Morton Center does in this community. To be honest with you, a year ago, I didn't know anything about the Morton Center. However, after doing a story about the center, I was touched by the way this organization not only treats the person with the addiction, but also the people who love them and care for them. Whether it's alcoholism or drug abuse, addiction extends its grip on children, spouses, friends, and believe it or not, even coworkers. But there is life after addiction, and the Morton Center proves that. In 2009, Mark Ingram was one of the candidates for Heisman, and all of the critics said he doesn't have the size or the speed, but he eventually won the Heisman Award because of his yak yards. They were the highest of any running back in the NCAA. Well, yak yards, that's an acronym. If you're not familiar with football, that's yards after contact. Well, in life, there are some contacts. There's alcoholism, there's drug abuse, and that's where the Morton Center comes in. The Morton Center helps you to continue to move forward, just like Mark Ingram did. After being contacted by the defender, Mark Ingram gained more yards than any running back in the league at the time. And so the Morton Center is there to help families, to help people move forward after that point of contact. And since 1984, the Morton Center has provided outpatient treatment for nearly 40,000 people from all walks of life. Drug and alcohol addiction doesn't just affect one neighborhood or one kind of person. It affects so many different people. A few years ago, I was doing a story about the heroin epidemic in Kentuckiana, and so I told the people, I want to find somebody who has hit rock bottom. I mean, somebody who's lived a hard life because of heroin. And so they said, we got the perfect person for you. And when I got to the place, a little girl greeted me at the door. She was probably 21 or 22. She had blonde hair. She went to one of the most prestigious schools in the Kentuckiana area. And so I said, okay, I'm Stefan from WDRB, and I'm looking for a young lady. She's going to talk to us about heroin addiction. And she said, that's me. And I said, I'm sorry, there's been some mistake, because I want somebody who's really been struggling, somebody who's hit rock bottom. And once she convinced me that she was the person who I was looking for, I said, so what was rock bottom for you? She said, well, I sold my parents' big screen TV. Is that bad enough? She said, I lived out of my friend's car for a month. Is that rock bottom enough? And I immediately thought to myself, somewhere, somebody is heartbroken because of this young lady. Somewhere, her mother and father are worried about her. Well, that is the beautiful thing about the Morton Center. It not only treats people like that young lady, it helps connect that person with their family members and gives them back to their family. Before you leave today, you will be inspired by what this organization does for our community, and you will also be given an opportunity to contribute to its continued success. Again, we want to thank you so much for being here. We also want to thank the members of the board of directors, or the board members, for their commitment throughout the year. At this time, would all of our board members please stand so that we can recognize you? All of our board members, please. And two of our board members are today's co-chairs. Would you please welcome Kelly Abel and Sandra McLaughlin to the podium?
Good afternoon. I'm Sandy McLaughlin, and I'm here today briefly just to thank our sponsors. We are so thankful and so grateful for the sponsors today who've made this luncheon and the mission of the Morton Center possible. They are the people that fueled the mission of the Morton Center. The Morton Center cannot give you the gift of sobriety, but what we can give you is the gift of tools for sobriety. So when you are ready for sobriety, you or your family, you will have the tools to give yourself the gift of sobriety. A special thanks to Sam Swope Auto Group, who is our Morton sponsor and our lead sponsor today. Also want to thank the Baxter's Corner, the Stephen C. Gault Company, Norton Healthcare, Able Public Policy, Cosair Charities, the Women's Diagnostic Center, the Glenview Trust Company, Ellis and Bowdenhausen, Cumberland Heights, WDRB Media, and Today's Women Magazine. Thank you all again for attending today.
Thank you so much, Judge McLaughlin. At this time, would you please welcome Father Jerry Eifler to the podium for the invocation?
Those of you who are familiar with the work of the Morton Center realize that it is life. It means restoring self. It means preserving families. The theme is well appreciated in our community. And as a former board member, I look forward each time to be able to come and be in this celebration with you. Let us pray. Strengthen us this day, O Lord, for all that lies ahead. Keep us in your care always, and grant us daily bread. Instruct us in your paths as we put our trust in you. Show your love through all we say and everything we do. Forgive us in your mercy whenever we are wrong. Wash our heart from sin and guilt, and make our spirit strong. Make us glad to lend a hand to all who are in need. Help us to relieve their pain, and may they soon be free. We offer you thanks, dear God, for all that you have done for us. Hear our prayers and raise us up to a closer with you may be. Bless the food for our use, and our energy go forth to be able to live a life of freedom. We pray this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Father Eifler. I'm from Louisville, and I was a political science major, so I love Election Day. My wife is here and can tell you how I used to torture her into watching old debates with me on VHS when we first started dating. So election time is really exciting for me, but I always print out a sample ballot so that she doesn't go in there and not know who she's going to vote for. And I remember, I think it was last year, Tracy asked me, she said, what about, she's going through, and she said, what about Mike O'Connell? And so I really never want to influence her, and I just want her to make her own decisions. And so I text two of my friends who work for the county attorney, one Republican and one Democrat, and I said, hey, Tracy's trying to decide on who to vote for. What do you think about Mike O'Connell? And all morning long, both of them sent me text messages nonstop. I finally had to say, stop, she voted for him. Move on to whatever you were doing. But at any rate, Mike O'Connell was last year's keynote speaker. He's a very powerful advocate for recovery in our community, and I can tell you that he does a lot of great work and is one of the greatest men I know. I have a profound amount of respect for him and for what he does for the people of this community. Would you please join me in welcoming County Attorney Mike O'Connell to the podium?
Thank you, Stefan, for that very nice introduction. And keep making those calls down there to my staff. There's always seems to be something going on. I'm very grateful to be here again. And I have a couple of nice tasks that I have ahead of me today. But Judge McLaughlin asked me if I would take a few minutes to talk about my personal experience, my wife Ellen's personal experience, obviously in our family, since when I was here last year, it was about 3 or 4 months after our son Matt died of an overdose. Well, he died of a combination, pursuant to the autopsy, a combination of alcohol, cocaine, and heroin. And as I mentioned last year, I'm sure alcohol was Matt's drug of choice, always had been. And he told me, I asked him one time, I said, well, do you ever take other stuff, you know? And he said, generally I don't, Dad, except if I want to stay up and party longer. You know, if it can keep me going longer, I will. So when he was found in his car behind an apartment complex down on Payne Street 3 days after we last saw him on Oaks Day last year, he was in a reclining position in the driver's seat with his U of L ball cap pulled down over his head as if he was taking a nap. And according to doctors that looked at this and examined it, that's what he was trying to do. He knew he couldn't drive. He knew he had to. He just got in his car, put his seat back, and he died. But heroin was the kicker in that evening, and so that's what happened. I'd just like to take a few minutes as I reflected on what my life, what Ellen's life, and our children, Michael and Annie, what their lives have been since Matt died, since we were here last. And one of the thoughts that at least came to me in thinking about being back up here again with you all is, you know, what has it been like for each of us? And we each have gone through a separate process with the help of many friends in this room who have provided guidance and information and resources and that type of thing. But I was thinking about my mom and dad, and I was thinking about the generation of my parents, and that when I was growing up, and many of us in this room I think would agree, when I was growing up, there weren't many stories in my family about other people's parents burying their children. There were a few, but they were all because of leukemia or cancer. Even at an early age in grade school, I can remember a classmate dying in the 6th grade. My daughter Annie had at St. Raphael's, my daughter Annie at Holy Spirit had a young friend in the 5th grade that died from leukemia. Those are the kind of deaths that generation usually had to experience with respect to their children. Those were the kind of deaths that people thought, we know this happens. And then I look at my generation with children of people that I know who are burying their children at alarming rates. And, you know, I wonder what my mom and dad would have done if one of us has died of a drug overdose. I mean, much less, you know, there's one thing about handling it because of an illness, but what would they do? It was something related to that or an accident, and my dad, who I love dearly, I do believe, though, that he would have consumed large quantities of alcohol if one of us had died. My mother, great, she would have worried a lot. She would have worried a lot. And she would have probably carried a lot of the load, just like Ellen's carried a lot of the load for our family. But as I stand here today, we're talking about a disease that is stripping people, young people out of the families of so many around this community and around the country. I didn't know how to deal with it. Some people say, well, you need to get some therapy or go see somebody, and I probably do, frankly. It's more, but there was a part of me that just said, I want to see how this washes over me. And how do I deal with it? I do have the benefit of a lot of people in this room and other rooms that we go to that help me. You know, people in recovery talk about you go to meetings to huddle together, and then after you huddle, you go back out into the world, and then you come back into a meeting and you huddle together so you have the strength to go back out into the world. I always like that image, but I've just so far have let it kind of wash over me and work through me, and I've been blessed to have some background. I mean, background plus support to do this, but and we all are dealing with it in a different way, as many of you would know. There's a man named Philip Woolney who writes a book called The Truth About Heroin. I'm going to talk about heroin today because although the Morton Center, I remember when it was around, it was alcohol. We got a bunch of drunks coming in here. We got a bunch of family members coming here. What are we going to do with my husband, my wife, my kids? You know, they drink too damn much. You know, it's just crazy. Well, that's true, but then they decided, like most things in life, that they had to adapt their business model because it was going to be adapted for them by what was going on. But anyway, Woolney says there's currently a heroin epidemic afflicting North America. And it's not confined only to urban areas or to older, seasoned drug addicts. The latest epidemic has swamped suburban and rural areas and drawn many teens into its deadly wake. The drug can take over the lives of even first-time or casual users, indeed, and can kill them. Addiction makes slaves of heroin users and often leads to a life of sickness, crime, and regret. Addicts risk sacrificing everything they cherish in their lives for the drug, receiving jail time for drug-related offenses, losing their own lives in the process. And then, as those in the recovery profession know, these terms, I'll just say these words and then you can guess what they're related to. Shaking, hot and cold sweats, runny nose, goosebumps, cramping, insomnia, muscle and bone aches, depression and extreme anxiety, irritability, nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, restless leg syndrome. Those are all symptoms of withdrawal from heroin, and they're not complete, but they are a list composed of someone who withdrew from heroin and what he had to go through. So, I, for one, of course, applaud everything that the Morton Center has done and in their adaptation for dealing with multiple forms of addiction and especially involving the family. Every family knows what addiction does to them, and as they say, it's like the tornado roaring through the house, the basement, whatever it is. So thank you so much for what you do and what you continue to do, and on behalf of the Morton Center for your support. We are trying to work on things on my side of the street downtown to try to do some things, but everybody's searching for answers. I mean, we sit around, you know, see me, we sit around, people are really honestly searching for answers on what to do. And it's, let's try this, let's try that. What about this? What about that? And when this man says that there is an epidemic sweeping North America, that is absolutely true. And if we had an epidemic of measles and smallpox and killing diseases like that, what do you think this country would do to combat? How much money do you think they would do to combat something like that? It'd be a national emergency. You know, Congress would be leading the forefront along with the other divisions of government, and we don't see it in that sense. We see, well, what do we do? What do we do? But we do things. We try. We try to do things that will help. And I I don't know what the answer is, that's for sure, and you all in this room would know better than me. But let me shift gears here a second. We're here today, and I have the distinct honor of introducing to you the Stephen C. Gault Stewardship Award. Today we're honored to establish this Stewardship Award, and the honor will be bestowed annually in recognition of those who have established an outstanding and sustained record for giving of their time and talent, and certainly their treasure. Steve has served on the board in many capacities, including as recent past president, since he first started serving the Morton Center in 1992. He has given generously of his time, talent, and treasure for over 23 years. Before I move this mic and take it over there and give it to Mr. Gault to say a few words about this, most all of you in this room know Steve. He's sitting over there. Steve can't come up here, and the reason he can't come up here is he's got his leg in a brace following surgery in connection with an accident he had at my house. Ellen was out of town. I called up Steve. I said, "You want to come over and smoke a cigar?" I'm up on the deck, out the second floor. So sure, he said, "I'll be over in 30 minutes." It was at the end of the day. He's a hard worker. So he comes over. We were up there. We smoked a cigar together, and then we decided we were going to go out and get a steak. And I had to change clothes, and he's got a couple of glasses in his hand. He goes down, and he's on his way down the steps. I'm upstairs in the bedroom, and I hear this, "Oh, Mike, Mike, Mike." I hear this crash on the floor, and I go down there, and there's Steve on his back on the living room floor, glasses, ice, everything around, and he is in very big pain. And it's been an arduous recovery process. He's had surgery. He's now in PT, and he's got a walker finally. He can move around a little bit. So I won't get into the details, but we took him to the emergency room that night. I was with him. The two of us were a real team, and got him stabilized. And I said, he's in the ER. The two of us are sitting there, and I said, "Well, how you doing?" You ask those stupid questions, "How you feeling?" "Oh, just great," But anyway, I said, he said, "Well, I'm kind of hungry." I said, "Well, where you want to go?" And he goes, "I don't know, Mike." He said, "If you were me at this time," he said, "where would you go?" And I said, "White Castle." So we drove through the White Castle in St. Matthews, the drive-in window, ordered a sack plus some other things. And he said, "Well, give me one of those vanilla milkshakes on the way so I can drink that on the way." So anyway, I'm going to let Steve say a few words here. Hold on just a second. This is a great thing, though. Steve Gault, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mike. And thanks to all of you for coming today. Let me first say that this recent knee surgery was absolutely not a result of alcohol consumption. And I want to make that point clear to this audience, but rather carelessness, age, and diminished agility. And you've heard kind of how that happened. I'd like to introduce the individuals at my table. Ellen O'Connell, my sister Jenny Marsh and her husband Charlie, my brother Chris and his wife Cynthia, and my business associates Amber Sacra, Larry Williams, and Dalton Driesbach. So they're all very important people in my life. I received the gift of sobriety in 1990, but I did not use the Morton Center services. Frankly, I didn't really know of the Morton Center at that time. However, when I was introduced to the organization in 1992, I quickly realized it represented an opportunity for me to give back by investing time and resources in the Morton Center, and that's really what I feel that I have been able to do. With its outstanding programs and skilled professionals, I saw that a person would be helping many, many people, the chemically addicted individuals and their families, receive the needed treatment, which would lead to that priceless gift of sobriety that I was so graciously given in 1990. With your continued support, given the quality of our current leadership, the current board of directors, and the clinical and administrative staffs, I am confident that our best days are yet to come. I am pleased and humbled that the organization is establishing this award in my honor. It has been, and it still is, a pleasure to invest in the Morton Center. Thank you.
You go back up, or
Thank you both so much for sharing your stories. Mike, my family and I, my wife and I prayed for you and your family during that time. Whenever I see a tragedy or deal with a tragedy in life, I always talk to my wife about how can we learn from this and how can we get better from this. And I think that we learn from tragedies by taking something from it and realizing what could happen. And we couldn't do that without people like you who are brave enough to share your story. So thank you so much for sharing that story with all of us. At this time, I would like to welcome to the podium the CEO of this great organization, Priscilla McIntosh.
If somebody was going to take a tumble, of course it would have to be me. I wanted to take this time today first to say thank you all for being here, but also last year we were so honored to be able to honor John Walsh. Many of us would not be here today without him, and it is because of him that we have a place called the Morton Center. We this year have established the Stephen C. Gault Stewardship Award. Last year we honored John, but I wanted to officially give him the Stephen C. Gault Stewardship Award today and say thank you so much, and thank you for being such a dear friend to me.
All right. On behalf of Mr. Gault over here, today we are going to honor as this year's recipient of the Stephen C. Gault Stewardship Award, Clay Morton. Clay has spent 27 years as an active member of the board of directors from the time of the Morton Center's founding in 1984. Clay, throughout his years of service, has demonstrated the embodiment of shepherding and safeguarding the Morton Center. The Stephen C. Gault Award recognizes his many years of service and the proud legacy of what he has shaped for his successors. So Clay, you're right here. We'd like to have you come up, receive your well-due recognition, and say a couple of words, if you would.
Thank you. I have spent 27 years as an active member of the board of directors of the Morton Center. From the time of its founding by my aunt, Jane Norton, in memory of my father. I served as an active member until 2011 when I retired from that status. For me, although I was never a client of the Morton Center, which might have been unfortunate for them because I had a way of over-testing everybody that tried to help me. But for me, the Morton Center came none too early. At the time of its founding, I had been drinking alcoholically for 32 years. And rigorous honesty compels me to admit that I continued to do so for 4 more years, but fortunately never at meetings. During those 4 years, I could not help being troubled by the notion that I was leading a kind of double life, living a kind of lie. In addition, I could not be unimpressed by what was going on here, particularly by the spirit of the work that was being done. It was infectious. And I think that, and let me say that it was being done by everybody, including Ann Stewart, who was the first office manager of the Morton Center and who is with us today. I think all this helped me to hasten my sobriety, but though not as much as the alliance between my wife Penelope and John Walsh. That proved overwhelming, fortunately. The ice was broken. It's not often that one gets to see the growth, survival, and progress of an organization, to watch it grow really from an acorn to a mighty oak tree. But that's what the Morton Center has done over the years, and the sailing has not always been easy. There were times when the journey was quite perilous, and the organization had to struggle just to stay alive. But having worked through and having survived those perilous times, the Morton Center has become a stronger, more effective, more adaptive, more durable, and more successful organization. It has created a springboard for going forward and serving those in need in the future. While there have been many changes over the years at the Morton Center, which one would expect, there has been one thing that has never changed, that's been there from the very beginning, and it is constantly being nurtured now. And that is the absolute and unwavering commitment to its mission, to healing and restoring the health of individuals and their families struggling with alcoholism and other life-robbing addictions. The commitment is so embedded in the organization's culture that I am sure that it will always be a foundational characteristic of the Morton Center, the very soul of the organization. To say that I am proud and thankful and humble to have been associated with the Morton Center through the years and to receive the honor bestowed upon me today is truly an understatement. Thank you.
Congratulations again, Clay. I'm glad. I held your hand, you might notice, when you came down there, because I did not want you to happen to you what happened to Gault over at... yeah, that was good. But we get a little unsteady, I've noticed, still. The keynote speaker that originally was scheduled to be with us today, Don Major, could not make it. Don, as many of you in this room know, has been a fierce advocate for recovery and a real fighter in every way for the sobriety of others throughout his career. Today he's fighting a new battle with his health, and while he promised to push, pull, or drag himself here today, when he accepted the invitation to speak, he simply was unable to gather his strength to be with us. So we have an equally great speaker for you today, and that's Mr. Tim Hyland. Many of you know Tim. His experience at the Morton Center is extensive. He served on the board as well, and he, his wife, and all of his children and two of his siblings have been recipients of some benefits of the Morton Center, but that's his story, and he'll tell you some things about that here today. I met Tim early in my journey, and he was a great help to me. You know, there's an expression in the rooms, you know, if somebody says, I want what he's got. I want what she's got. And when I first met Tim, I wanted what he had. And we're glad to have Tim here. He's a good man. He shares his time, talent, and treasure, but for recovery and everything. He lives his life as a person that is steeped in recovery. And so I give you Tim Hyland.
this up just a little bit. Hi, everybody. I am Tim Hyland. And I, just like Steve, got the gift of recovery in April 12th of 1990. That's been just a wonderful thing for me, and I'm very honored to be here, very honored to represent Don, who's been my mentor in my 25 years of sobriety. And as Mike mentioned, I have a little experience with the Morton Center. I served on the board, and unlike some of the other guys, Steve and whatnot, my family has been clients of the Morton Center. You know, and I was just thinking, Steve and I came in the same class in 1990 of recovery, and, you know, I was thinking about you breaking your foot over at Mike's house. I mean, you would think, with liability being the way it is today, and that a guy would take you to Ruth Chris instead of White Castle, you know? We're going to have to work on the salary for the county attorney, I think, down there. But you know, I wanted just to share today, you know, I'm supposed to be the keynote speaker. And, you know, I picked up the paper this morning, and what a wonderful article it was on the Morton Center, you know. And I thought, you know, what I really want to talk about is, you know, somehow, you know, and I think Mike alluded to it, we have to get this problem, this epidemic, this disease out of the shadows in the society that we live in. You know, I read that article this morning, and I was really glad to see it because at least there wasn't another article on another craft bourbon institution opening up somewhere. And I say that, I say that because that's what we're fighting. You know, we're fighting something that is so well accepted by our society, and yet, as we all know in this room, people are dying left and right in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I shared this story with you. I was thinking, I had the honor of being honored in 2009 in the Catholic community. I grew up in Catholic schools and went to Catholic high school, and I taught in Catholic schools. And every year the Catholics have a big deal called it's called the Catholic Education Foundation. And one time a year they have a big dinner like this down at the Gault house, and 2,500 people, you know, $200 a dinner, and it's their big deal. And they usually honor 5 or 6 people, you know, who have done substantially well in their careers. And so I'm notified that I'm nominated for this. And I'm like, wow, I mean, what's this all about? You know, my little company's done okay, but, you know, the other guys that were on this thing with me were the guy who's CEO of Sirius, you know, David Heitzman, who was the president of Stockyards Bank, Junior Bridgman, for God's sakes, you know. And I called Don. I said, hey, I don't know what the deal is here. You know, I don't know what I'm doing in this group at all. And he said, well, Timmy, you know, evidently there's some reason that you're there. And so anyway, you have to fill out a bio to do this because they do like a this is your life type of thing up there. They show you, you know, where you grew up and where you went to school and all the boards of directors you're on. And so I put mine together, and I'm like, you know, well, board of director of the Morton Center, board of director of the Talbot House, which is a halfway house for men, you know, and I go right through the whole thing. I mean, and I realized that that's all I got. You know, basically my adult life has been in the area of recovery of people with alcohol and drug addiction problems. Share something very interesting with you. As intimidated as I was by that, we had the dinner. Everybody gets to say their little piece. And keep in mind, you've got the who's who of the Catholic community here. And after the thing is over, you know, I looked up and I got down off the podium and stood there. And there was a line of people lining up to talk to me. Not to Junior Bridgman, not to David Heitzman, not to the guy who was the CEO of Sirius. They wanted to talk to me, and I had people coming up to me saying, you know, I don't know what to do with my son. You know, I don't know what to do with my husband. I don't know what to do with my sister. I don't know what to do with my wife, you know. You know, and it almost brought tears to my eyes because I realized that, you know, it wasn't the main topic that night, but how many people it touched in that room was just absolutely unbelievable. And even after that, I got calls from people weeks and months after that were at that dinner. You know, and what I realized is, you know, this thing kind of exists in the shadows, unfortunately. There's still a huge stigma about alcoholism and drug addiction in our culture. You know, we just don't like to talk about it. Mike was so right, you know, in my generation when I grew up, my parents just didn't talk about that, right? We had no alcoholics in the family. We had nervous people and characters, you know? You know? Really, I was the first alcoholic, as it turned out. You know, and now, now the game has really changed. And, one of the things they asked me to do is try to vest my story a little bit in my experience with the Morton Center. And I can't do that. I got sober in April 12th of 1990. My wife, I believe, was the first contact with the Morton Center during the 80s. And then we all started coming. Because, what I really, and it was emphasized in the article today, and Sandy did a great job of identifying it. If there ever was a family disease, this is it. So as she said in the article this morning, we don't know when and who is ever ready to get sober. But what we do know is that the families, the people surrounding the addict or the alcoholic get very, very confused, very, very sick. And giving those people direction, is the best thing we can ever do, and there's so little of that. I'm on the board of directors of the Talbot House, which is the oldest halfway house in Louisville for men. And one of the things we talked about recently is, we're getting all these kids, 19 to 24 years old. Used to be back in the day, we had 45, 50-year-old drunks. And now we have these kids showing up 19 to 24 years old, and their parents don't know what to do with them. And at our last board meeting, what we discussed was, we got to come up with some education somehow for the people, these families. They don't know what to do, and many of them are doing the wrong things. Many of them are allowing these kids. We had one kid who was very affluent from the East End. He stayed at the Talbot House on the weekends. He went home and drank wine with his parents on the weekend. Came back on Monday and right back in the Talbot House. And we kind of suggested to him that's probably not going to work, But my point is, the parents obviously didn't understand that his recovery was not going to work as long as they were allowing him to drink wine with them on the weekends, And it just astounds me sometimes about, the general ignorance of people who really want to do well, but have no idea what they're dealing with and how to certainly let go, and in our case, let God take care of the drunk. I'll just share with you my story. I'll try to go through it quickly. First of all, I'm Irish Catholic. There's about half the story, right? And grew up in the West End of Louisville. In my family, it wasn't if you were going to drink, it was when and how good were you going to do it, That was just the way it was. And, so I knew I was going to drink. I was hoping I was going to do it a little bit better than people ahead of me. And it worked just the opposite, And what I can tell you, from 19 years old on, alcohol started to take from me everything that would ever mean anything to me. I was a good athlete. I got a scholarship to St. Louis University. However, because of my drinking, that all came to an end by my junior year. Without getting into a lot of the details, I was trying to get into law school, and I guess I had the brains to get into law school, but my drinking prevented me from getting into law school. Came back here into Louisville, got into teaching and coaching for about 10 years, which is really a tough place for an alcoholic. But then I got married in 1970. And I got married to a young lady that, came from exactly a different family from I did. I was from the West End, she was from the East End. In my house, if you walked in there, they put something to drink in your hand. My dad got of course, the priest and the nuns were easy. But then, he had the postman in there, he almost had the Jehovah's Witnesses guys in there one time drinking. But my wife came from a family where her dad would split a beer with me. So that kind of gives you an idea. So we were going to have problems from the beginning, and we did. It's really difficult for me to compact this story because some of you know my story, and it's we could talk about this whole part of it for about 2 hours. But the bottom line, what I'll share with you in 1980, I'll give you the capsule of the 1980s. Keep in mind, I got sober April 12th of 1990. In the 1980s, I got divorced for the first time from my wife, but we got remarried in 1985. We got divorced again in 1987. We got remarried, however, in 1990 when I got sober. Now, see, most of the time you tell people that, they go, "What?" You share that amongst the recovering people, they go, "Well, yeah, sounds normal to us." Now, the reason I mention that, what is that about? Well, it's about alcohol and alcoholism and everything that goes with it. I love him, I hate him, I love him, he's good, he's bad, he's bad, he's good. And keep in mind, we're going to the Morton Center all through this, right? And I say that because, the disease of alcoholism is cunning, baffling, and powerful. You know, and what you had there were two people who really cared for each other, had no idea what they were dealing with. No idea. And it's not easy. It's not easy. It's almost counterintuitive on really how to deal with it than what our nature tells us. Also, during the 80s, like I say, I started my own business. So I already told you we got divorced for the first time in 83, remarried in 85, divorced again in 87, remarried in 90. I was engaged to 2 other women in between time. I was in the nut house 3 different times, going to the Morton Center back and forth. I had 14 different business partners. I lived 12 different places. Guy shot me, and I lost $250,000. And of course, I was thinking, this is going okay, you know. You know, I say it like that because, you know, that was the best I had. And, you know, we're dealing with a really, really tricky thing. And thank God of April 12th of 1990, you know, God gave me the vision and the clarity that day to show up. And, you know, I guess I wanted to share, you know, if there's anything I know about my story is that it is a family disease. And I'm so grateful to the Morton Center. Because as I look back, although it didn't seem to be working at the time, and I remember being very, very, resentful of all the money I was spending. You know, remember I went in one time with John Walsh, and I had some anger issues, and he had me beating a pillow on the sofa. And I thought, I'm going to kill this guy before I get out of here, you know? But the point was that, you know, as I look back on it, it took all of that. It took all of that for all of us. You know, my daughter, my sons, especially my wife and I. Because what happened at the Morton Center, you gave me education, you gave me knowledge, you gave us some education about what we were trying to deal with. And eventually that was going to come to fruition. And what I'll share with you, you know, I want to give you a happy ending to that story. We did get divorced again when I was 5 years sober in 1995, and I went on my merry way, and I got in another marriage arrangement, and it didn't work out. And so again, strange thing happened on I always say on my way to long-term celibacy in Alcoholics Anonymous. But what happened was my first wife, my most frequent wife, as I call her, she called me from South Carolina, and she said, I got the kids down here on vacation. Would you like to come down? I said, yeah. And this is like year 2000. We've been divorced at this point now about 7 years. And we went down there, and a miraculous thing happened, you know. For the first time, we became friends. For the first time, the walls that were so high didn't seem so high, you know. We became parents and co-parents. Can't explain what happened now. What I'm going to tell you is what I don't know is that over the last 5 to 7 years, my wife had gone back to the Morton Center with my friend John. And for the first time ever, she had realized that she had a part in this, because up until that point in time, she really didn't have a part. But I don't know that's happening, you see. And God was working behind the scenes through the Morton Center with John. So when we got back together by accident, you know, in 2000, something had changed. And what I will share with you guys today is this coming November, the 28th, will be our 45th gross wedding anniversary. And you know what? We're friends today, buddy. We're buddies. You know, we don't do anything without each other. She's away with her Yaya ladies this week in Iceland on a trip, and I miss her. You know. And again, how does that happen? I don't know. I think it's certainly through God's grace, but I also think it's because of organizations like this. Because if she didn't have a place to go when she got to her bottom, okay, then we're not back together. You know, I'll share one other story with you that's kind of similar to Mike's. It doesn't end the same. I have a daughter, and I had a 13-year-old daughter, and from the get-go, I knew she was going to be a problem. You know, her first little phrase when she was a toddler was, "I'll do it myself." Her second little phrase was, "You're not the boss to me," you know. And by the time she was 12 years old, you know, she's running the streets up at Bardstown Road. I'm finding half pints in her backpack, 6-packs in her, in her closet, and she's getting, stealing, shoplifting. I'm getting her out of jail for shoplifting. I mean, the game was on. So, again, this is a child who'd been through the Morton Center, and I had a lot of anger issues and a lot of things that go along with being a child in an alcoholic home. Very gifted child, you know, beautiful, talented, great athlete, very talented artist. She went to the Chicago Art Institute on an Art Institute scholarship. About 15 years ago, she came home from, she had gone to Los Angeles, and I knew she was really in bad shape, but she came home. And let me tell you what we saw. You know, this was this beautiful baby girl of mine, and her eyes were all caved into her head. Her cheeks were collapsed. Teeth were rotting out of her head. She was so thin you could count her ribs. And I always remember this moment because I asked her, I said, honey, is there anything that we can do for you? And she looked me right in the eyes and she said, Dad, I am fine. And I realized that moment what a powerful, powerful disease alcoholism is. You know, what a powerful disease and how difficult is that. You know, and I know she went back to Los Angeles, and you guys, and I knew it was only going to be a matter of time before that phone would ring, you know. I had to, because she was living in her car in the streets of Los Angeles on a liquid diet alone. About 5 weeks later, the phone did ring. It was her. She was so weak she could hardly whisper. She was just whispering, and she says, Daddy, what should I do? And here's where I think the many, you know, times in the Morton Center, and being in recovery with around people like you, she said, Daddy, what can I do? And I have to tell you, my first thought was, I'm going to get on an airplane, I'm going to go get my kid, and I'm going to bring her home. That was what my daddy instinct wanted to do. Somewhere what came out was, honey, here's a man in number in recovery in Los Angeles. I hope and I pray that you will call him. And I hung that phone up at you all, and I cried, and I cried for hours, I think, because I'm thinking it's 50-50 whether or not she makes that phone call or we bring her home in a box. But I also knew, and you all had taught me that I had given her the only opportunity and hope that any addict or alcoholic can ever have. I had given her a lifeline to the very thing that had been my lifeline, to the only thing that I know has worked for people like me and like her, and I'm sure some of you, you know? And that was hard to do. It's hard for any parent to say no. It's hard for any parent to let go and basically give that child an opportunity to either live or die based on what she's going to do with her addiction. But, you know, I'm very, very happy to tell you that this past July, her mom and I got on an airplane. We flew to Los Angeles to help her celebrate her 13 years sober, and we're really grateful for that. And you know, the thing that I think about this, and I get fired up about this sometimes too. My whole life is, you know, what Mike was talking about, it's become so commonplace, unfortunately. It always drives home when we know the person, like Matt. But down at the Talbot House, for example, which is down on St. Catherine Street, over the last 4 years, we've had 6 young men between 19 and 24 all die from heroin overdoses. You know, it is epidemic. And these are not kids from the inner city or off the street. These are kids from affluent families. These are kids with good educational backgrounds. You know, it's a whole different deal going on out there now. And I guess what I'm thinking about, where is the energy going to come from? Where's the initiative going to come from? When is it going to get bad enough that people are going to stand up and start screaming about, let's do something about our kids? You know, they're dying in the streets day after day after day, you know. And again, for a guy like me who's been in recovery and who's dedicated to recovery, I guess there's never enough you can do. But I'm very glad, for example, to see that article in the paper today. I'm very glad to see Stefan, to see you here, people from outside of the recovery community. Somehow I think we have to get out of the shadows. You know, if you think about it, you know, if we have cancer, and cancer is a bad, bad disease, but when we want to raise money for cancer, we have a huge march and everybody puts on pink. If we want to raise money for heart disease, you know, we all get behind it. When it comes to this, for some reason, we all kind of, as a general public, we all kind of take a little step back and go, oh, I don't know, we'll work on this behind the scenes. I don't know how much longer we can work on it behind the scenes, you know, and I appreciate, Mike, what you're doing at your level, at the legislative level, the judicial level, you know, and I know we have a lot of people here in prominent positions in your businesses and in the community. You know, we have to find other ways to drag this thing out of the shadows and get it in the forefront, because it's serious stuff. You know, I just Googled up some things, and even at my age, I mean, I do know how to Google, and But you know, 2.5 million people died from alcoholism alone last year in the world. That doesn't even include drugs. You know, 320,000 young people between 19 and 24 years old died of the disease of alcoholism last year. There was an article in the paper again early this week about suicides. I don't know if you read about that. Second leading cause of death. Well, where do you think a lot of those suicides emanate from? Almost every time, you know, it has something to do with substance abuse, drugs, alcohol. It's all tied together, and like I said, so, you know, thank God, you know, and I'm like all of you. I've spent a lifetime as an adult, just like John Walsh and just like just about everybody in here in Clay, of giving back because giving back because of the gift it was given to me. But now I'm starting to see that, look, I've got 8 grandkids and 1 great-grandchild. And it really scares me. It really scares me because the field, the plateau out there, the plains out there today are different than I grew up in. You know, what I do, you know, I have what we call the 12-year-old talk. When each of my grandchildren turns 12, I sit down with them and basically explain to them why I go to these meetings, about the history of alcoholism in their family. At least I want them to know, because I didn't know. I entered in the adult world with no idea what the disease of alcoholism was. I at least want these kids to know if you start to see a problem with substance abuse of any kind, you need to know genetically that you've got a problem. I have 3 12-year-olds. There's a set of twins and 1 boy. So I'd gotten through the 1 boy and the one twin, and I set up my luncheon with the 3rd twin, and we sit down, and she looked at me and she says, "Pawpaws, is this the drunk talk?" I said, "Yes, it is the drunk talk." But my thing is, all I know is I want to give them the education that I didn't have. I want them to know how deadly, you know, the disease is out there right now, how treacherous the terrain is in terms of what we know, just like what happened with Matt. You know, and the bottom line is, it's like, you know, does it take money? Absolutely. You know, and I'll just say a few words on that because, you know, we all kind of, just like church, you know, when they start talking about money, everybody's heads go down. And, you know, but I was thinking about this the other day, you know, how much money do I give to something like this? You know, how does it compare to what I spend on my U of L football and basketball tickets? How does it compare to what I spend every year on going out to eat? How does it compare on what I spend on clothes every year? And I'll tell you what, how it compares in terms of value and how it impacts my life, there's no comparison. And yet, as most all of us know, we spend a lot more money in all those areas than we ever do, you know, in something like this. And but I need to say that because, you know, it is all these people, all of you in here have given, and I know that, and I'm the same way. You know, we have this little Talbot house down there that's self-supporting, and we have to do whatever we have to do, you know, golf scrambles, this and that to keep the thing open. But I tell you, you know, it's the best money, you know, that I've ever spent. And what I would tell you all also, if you could see some of these kids that show up there, and you could see their parents when they bring them there, and how destitute they are, and how confused they are, that I hope you can do something to help my kid. I hope you can save his life. You know, then, you know, how much money that is worth really doesn't become much of an issue. You know, so I just say that to you today. And I know you all continue to support this group, and I ask you to continue to support them. And also, I ask all of you as I finish up here to look for ways to, you know, get this thing about recovery out of the shadows. You know, I wish the Morton Center could have a ongoing column in the Courier-Journal. You know, I think it's that important. I think that many people would be affected. You know. And just to finish this up and let you know that, you know, I put my money where my mouth is. I got a check here for you, Priscilla. It's nowhere close to what my U of L tickets cost, but it's a good start. Thank you all.
Tim, that was an awesome story. My wife and I pray for our son every day, and we've made the sacrifice to send him to what we think is one of the best schools in the state. And if it's happened once, it's happened a dozen times. People walk up to us and say, you know, those private school kids are the worst ones when it comes to drugs and alcohol. So you reminded us that we need to have the drunk talk with him. He's got a few more years, but we'll have it with him. You know, one of the things I learned as we prepare to close about the Morton Center is that it's not one-stop shopping. It's not just a one-step program. You know, some families are there 5 days a week. How many of you have a GPS? You've used GPS before. Now, here's the tricky question. How many of you are like me and have a GPS but ignore it sometimes? Have you ever done that? Right. One time I was going to Cincinnati to get my hair cut by my old barber because I convinced my wife I needed to do that. I was really just shopping. And so he said, well, I'm on the same street, but it's down the road. So I plugged it in just to be on the safe side. And I kept driving, and I couldn't find it because I thought I've got to know where it is. It's on the same street. And every time I made a wrong turn, the GPS kept saying rerouting. And then finally I gave up and said, I'm going to listen to the GPS, and we got to the barber shop. Well, likewise, the Morton Center is the GPS for these families. In talking to Judge McLaughlin one day, she talked about the signs, the red flags that come up. And as parents, you probably don't know what to look for as loved ones because you want to believe your loved one. Well, the Morton Center is there. Thank God for the Morton Center and all you guys do. The Morton Center helps to guide families and keep you on track, maybe when your loved one is taking a wrong turn, and to make sure you're doing the right thing for them. Again, we want to thank the Morton Center for all the work you do in this community. And finally, we want to invite Kelly Abel to the podium for closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you, Tim. Most importantly, I was taught at an early age, once the sale is done, just shut up. So the smartest thing I could do is not say a word and let it go, because you gave us our guiding hand today. I do have a responsibility to thank a couple of people, and then I have a wonderful announcement for all of you who have joined us here today. I do want to thank all of our guests who've taken time out of your day to spend this time with us and to learn more about the Morton Center. And hopefully you've enjoyed the speakers as I have. I'm grateful now that, Tim, thanks to you, I know best how to describe my family of characters and nervous people. That was very helpful to learn. Thank you to all of our speakers. Mike, obviously it's wonderful to have you and Ellen back for our second event that we hope will be the second of many. I want to thank, special thanks to Priscilla McIntosh, our very powerful, dedicated, enthusiastic CEO of the Morton Center. Thank you very much, Priscilla. Want to also say a special thanks to Judge Sandy McLaughlin. Sandy and I have become personal friends. This is our second board that we've served on together. This is the second year we have co-chaired this luncheon, which is always a pleasure. And I want to say a special thanks to Sandy today for opening up very publicly, as many people in this room have done today and before, but to open up her life publicly, share the short story of she and Justin, and to be on the front page of the paper. Thank you. Before I go on, there's one thing I've noticed. If anybody wants to dive into those desserts, that's secretly a passion of mine, so don't feel guilty if you cling some utensils while I'm talking. The desserts are there for you to enjoy. I do have a very special announcement to share with you today. You are going to have an opportunity. Some of you have done this with us before. You're going to have an opportunity to be a part of what you've heard about the Morton Center today and to carry on the great works of the Morton Center. But there's a really special announcement that I have to tell you before I ask you to consider what your contribution could be today. There are envelopes on your table for those of you who would like to make a contribution today, or you can make a commitment today and follow up with it. But we have an anonymous donor today who has agreed that for the money that is raised today here at the luncheon, so the checks that are put in the envelopes and the commitments are made, this donor, who is asked to remain anonymous, will match your gift made today dollar for dollar. I would just ask for you to consider and remember that our small gifts put together can make a big difference, and make a big difference in bringing this disease to the forefront and to continue the mission of the Morton Center. So with that, I would ask you to enjoy your dessert for a few more moments, consider your gift to the Morton Center, and most of all, I hope your journey, the rest of your journey today, will be a blessed one and a good one after spending this time with us today. Thank you.